words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable to God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Now, you might have noticed on the audio service, which sometimes does have the right thing on it, that it says talk and discussion. So don't worry, I'm not going to quiz you, but it has been our tradition, our custom, when I do a service, when we started doing them soon during the pandemic, that we have a few minutes after the talk for comments and thoughts and for people to bring something to the service themselves. So just thought I'd give you a warning if you're visiting us today. We start with the book of Ruth. Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. When you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. Now, I think there is a reason why this reading in the lectionary matches with the Gospel reading. And I think it's because of two themes: faithfulness to God and self-sacrifice that comes from it. I'm going to give you a little thought experiment. I want you to imagine being Ruth. You're a woman at a time when women's lives depend on the protection of a man. You're a widow with no sons, all of which makes you as vulnerable as anyone could be in those times. Imagine then you're in this situation and you have a choice. You have a choice between staying in your own country and with your own blood relatives and take a risk, or to move to a foreign country you've never visited, where a family may or may not have ended, and be alone with another woman who has no protection whatsoever. Two vulnerable women alone. Now, I want you to be honest, and I want you to raise your hand if you choose to stay in your home country. Lovely. That went as I planned, which is always good when I do these kind of things. Now, just to be thorough, raise your hand if you just leave. Okay, thought so. Now, of course, you're right, the sensible thing would be to stay home with your people, with your culture. But Ruth is moved to compassion and love from a mother-in-law, who also has no one left, and decides to accompany her on the dangerous journey back to a country that Naomi has not visited for decades, one where she may or may not have some surviving relatives to give her help. Ruth says, "May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." Ruth's heart is so steeled she will not leave Naomi's side even if she should die, and even though Naomi is an older woman than she is, so it's quite likely that she died before Ruth. Now, of course, for us, Ruth is not just any random woman from the Bible. She's one of a handful of women that the Gospels remember in Jesus' genealogy. As one ancient Christian author put it, what a great thing it is to comfort a lonely woman. Ruth, for her reward, is made an ancestress of Christ. Had Ruth not been moved to compassion, had she not left a bad situation for one possibly even worse, she would not have been grafted into Jesus' lineage. But she had no way of knowing this. All she had was love from Naomi and the courage to take a step into the unknown, into danger, trusting the God whom Naomi and her sons had trusted. Trusting that foreign God even when it seemed like Naomi had lost everything one could count as a blessing: her husband, her sons. Ruth trusted an unknown God, and from her trust, God would eventually raise the Messiah. And of course, she's not the only one of Jesus' ancestors whose trust changed the course of history. Paul tells us of another one, Abraham. Abraham trusted God, and that was his righteousness. Romans 4. Like Ruth, Abraham's faithfulness started as a leap into the unknown, and from there a billion stars were lit for each one of us to be his inheritance. Like Ruth and Abraham, we also read of Mary, who took a leap of faith by trusting in God's promise, and by trusting her words were proven true. From henceforth, she said, all generations shall call me blessed, as we read in the Gospel of Luke. By trust and through trust, these people became in their own ways bearers of the good news, others to claim as ancestors of our family of faith. Is it then surprising what the teacher of the law said to Jesus? He said that it's far more to love God and neighbour is far more than any burnt offerings or sacrifices. And is it surprising that Jesus said to him that he was not far from the kingdom? Ruth loved Naomi, her neighbour, and by trusting God, that love bore incredible fruit. Abraham loved God with all his heart, mind and soul, and through trust he was given countless children, as many as the stars in the sky. Mary trusted and loved God, and she redeemed the tears of Eve from that trust. Three extraordinary characters, all related to Jesus, and all share one defining moment in life, one that did not involve sacrifice or burnt offerings. Jesus warned, beware of the doctors of the law. These are the men who tap the property of widows. And indeed, trust is free. Love of God and love of neighbour are free. And they are the best offerings that we can bring to the altar of the Lord. Now, you forgive me for being interactive once again, but I would like you to raise your hand, and hopefully this works too, if you ever heard someone preach on today's gospel reading about the widow and use the poor widow as an example of giving generously to your chapel or church. So raise your hand if that's a way that this reading has been used. Okay, and we got at least someone that's helpful. Now, whilst we will have the offering during the last hymn after this talk, this is not the interpretation I'm going to pick for the passage. Because I don't think it's by chance that Jesus mentions the doctors of the law eating up the property of the widows right before he sees the poor widow. Nor do I think it is by chance that he mentions how well off these are right before we're told a group of rich people were showing off their generosity. I think the scene in front of Jesus' eye is exactly why he warned his disciples. After all, they really did need things spelled out for them, didn't they? And although spelling things out he did, still today we find celebrity preachers with their book deals and luxury villas and private jets, not that different from the doctors of the law that Jesus spoke about. What the widow did that was worthy of praise was her trust. To give her money, the only money she had, to trust God. She had to trust God to give her money because that's all she had. But the rich people didn't need to trust God. They were just throwing away spare cash. Nothing to be worried about. Not too long ago, I stood in front of a joint congregation, a Congregational Church and a Methodist Church, giving a sermon on another Bible passage that talks about money, the rich young ruler. And during my sermon, I mentioned how the passage teaches us that money is far too often one of those principalities and powers that the Apostle Paul warns us about. I preached about the condemnation of exploitation and coveting riches in the Jewish prophets, and about the way Christians today can be unknowingly complicit in many money-related evils. I warned about government spending tax money on vanity projects and immoral weapons, whilst people freeze in winter or children go hungry. It was a very nice, I thought, service, and we had Tell Out My Soul as well, which I think always works very well with this kind of themes. But do you know what happened after coffee, once the service was done? As I sat there drinking my drink and listening in to what people were saying. Some of the people who had sat through my sermon, who had put 20, 30 pounds in a collection basket when it came around, those same people that had come to me at the door and said how an important message I had preached that day, those people, as they chatted to one another, they went on to talk about current news. And some of them said how silly it was that people were moaning about losing the extra £20 in the universal credit, because after all, it's just £20. What they didn't realise is that, like the rich people in a reading, they've thrown out money in the offertory without having to think twice, because for them it wasn't that much. We can all probably here spare £20. It's not that much money. They did not have to trust in God in the moment they put that money away, because it was not the difference for them between eating and eating. That money was worth, in reality, much less than a poor person's tuppence would be. Now, in fairness, I should probably add that not everyone took part in this discussion. And at least one woman had the courage to say, "Didn't we just have a sermon about that?" And I give thanks to God for that woman. Now, as the Methodists around us here know, John Wesley wrote a famous sermon called The Use of Money. It is remembered mostly for the quite catchy phrase, earn all you can, save all you can, and give all you can. But what we often forget about that sermon is that Wesley said that if Methodists truly did all that, including giving all they could, there would be no poor people left in the United States. And the reason he preached that sermon was not because the churches were halfway through eradicating poverty in America and he was giving them a nice pat on the back and saying, "Well done." The reason he had to preach that was because he saw the churches failing the poor right in front of his own eyes. He had to preach that because centuries after the church fathers had said that what the rich don't need is what the poor can't do without, the church was still not giving all it could. I promised you I was not going to use this passage to ask you to put half your wallet in the offertory, and I'm not going to. And I apologise to Phil in advance, and I hope he doesn't pass out when he hears me saying that. I'm going as far as to say, whatever you were planning to give us today, half that amount. Give us half, and give the rest to the food bank, or another charity helping people in need in this country. And if you can't think of a charity, come and see me afterwards, and I'll give you some suggestions. Even better, give us nothing, but when you go home, have a look at your pension, your savings, your bank accounts, and see where your money is going and what it's doing. Trust just a little bit. Trust that if you take a tiny step out of your comfort zone and move your money to a place where you can do a teeny tiny bit more good, God will return your tiny trust as 100-fold in grace to the world, thanks to you and through you. And after all, I'm not asking you to move countries like Ruth did, and I don't think God is asking any of us today to do that. Just one tiny thing. We don't have to move countries, at least not just